From its inception, Western philosophy was at base the attempt to give sense to the world by explaining it in terms of words. This began with Socrates and Plato, who believed that there was a true world of forms that was to be explained and understood in words, that was the real reality, and that was prior to the experience of the world that we have. This Platonic notion of a true world, higher than the real world, or higher than the world we experience, is also believed by the Christians, who believe in the world of God, that is the true world, that the world we live in now is fallen and secondary, and that the real true reality is the world of God. This faith in the Word resounded through Western philosophy all the way into the modern philosophical tradition, culminating in Kant, who changed the game when he severed the truth of the world from the domain of the Word. Kant's project was to outline the limits of reason, that is to say, to outline just how much of the world, or truth, can be understood through words. He essentially sent Plato off. There was no longer a mission for Plato. This idea that there is a true world of forms, of words, that we can become aware of, was a mission that was abandoned after Kant, because he put a boundary around the domain of words. That there is truth, there is necessarily a word, there's necessarily a world, much of a world, beyond what is attainable and available to reason. After Kant, in fact, the only truth that philosophers could examine was no longer truth about the world as it is. That was out of the reach. The only truth that remained was truth about the Word. We can talk about reason, but we cannot talk about the world. For if the world is not available to reason, then reason cannot talk about the world by definition. So all reason is capable of doing is describing its own processes. Starting where Kant left off, Hegel pursued the description of reason, the understanding of reason, or that is, the truth of the word, with a religious fervor. He went even farther than Plato, who at least had an anchor in the sense that he believed his speculations as to a true world of forms was actually real. His reasoning had an anchor somewhere in a hypothetical world. Hegel, on the other hand, did not believe that the true world was actually available to him. So his reasoning and his analysis of language and of reason has no anchor. He's looking for an anchor in the thing he is analyzing, which is reason. But the tool he is using to analyze it is also reason. What results is the consumption of reason by itself. Reason is the snake eating its own tail in Hegel's philosophy. He deploys the word against the word, with no anchor outside of itself. And the result is a tumultuous chaos of jargon. The question following this then is, why has Hegel had any popularity at all? Why is he not seen as being a bottomless pit? And the reason for that is that man cannot survive without an anchor. And what the idealist philosophy of Hegel allows is for any faith, for any unconscious anchor the thinker in the Hegelian mode has, what he is able to do is to package it so thoroughly, to conceal it in jargon, that it becomes invisible to both himself and to his audience. So that, to an observer, a Hegelian philosopher, possessed of the most arbitrary and absurd faith, appears to be soaring at the limits of reason. The appeal, then, of Hegel is that underground faiths are set free. That the thinker can now believe any absurdity he desires, and cast himself still as the strict philosopher. After Kant's constraint of the word, Schopenhauer abandoned it entirely. He wanted to pursue philosophy in a more fruitful sense. He realized that reason is a part of nature. It is an offshoot of nature, and that therefore it cannot take supremacy over nature. To attempt to capture the truth of the world in words is to attempt to dominate the whole by a part, which is an impossible task. Schopenhauer was a reader of the Upanishads, of the Eastern philosophy, and you can see the influence that they had on his philosophy, where he renounces this Western tradition of strict adherence to reason and logic and the word. It is because of this renunciation of the Western faith in reason that Schopenhauer is called a pessimist, because he believes that this entire task, a 2,500 year hope, is fruitless. It is a failure. Truth is not something that can be stated, and for that reason he's called a pessimist. But he is not actually hopeless. He simply moves the process of philosophy away from trying to prove things in terms of the word. He is called a pessimist because the philosophers around him have dedicated themselves thoroughly to skill in the word, to becoming incredible logicians. And their motivation for that is that by somehow becoming skilled at logic and reason, that they will be privy to the deepest knowledge of reality. And to see Schopenhauer renounce that and say that no, reality is accessible not to the word, that is why they call him a pessimist, because they are pessimists. They see no way for them to access reality. They are idealists who have been let down. Schopenhauer himself placed his hope in art, particularly music, and pity. He thought that the deepest understanding of the reality of the world that we experience is the experience of the will, the experience of the emotions and the passions, and that art and music are a way of engaging with those in a fruitful sense. If we can peer into our soul and feel the musical moods and organize those moods into an orchestra, then we are becoming whole in a deep sense. And there is a process of refinement which is meaningful and not merely an illusion. The results of that refinement are experienced. They are not proven. But aside from Schopenhauer's own response to his destruction of the faith in reason, he opened the way to the valuation of values, where before everything had been seen through the value of reason, everything had to be judged and measured through logic. After Schopenhauer, philosophy could become an engagement with the world and an engagement with our own values, how we perceive the world, what we do with the world, what we want to do in the world. And it is for that reason that Schopenhauer spawned the philosopher of our era, Nietzsche. In sum, Schopenhauer represents a metamorphosis of the thinker. From Plato, the West has privileged the word, and that privileging of the word continued up until Kant, when the reality outside the word was discovered and proved. The neurotic direction that can be taken is that taken by Hegel, where the desperate faith in the word is taken to a limit, where Hegel holds onto the world while he drowns in the ocean of reality. And Schopenhauer, as the wisest philosopher in the German tradition, revived wisdom, and he set philosophy a new task, not to look backward to the faith in reason, but to look forward into the present and into the direct experience of the will and of reality. And it is for that reason that Schopenhauer is a turning point in Western philosophy. He is the off-ramp of Western philosophy, where the tradition since Plato points in that neurotic direction. It inevitably culminates in Hegel. Schopenhauer provides a new alternative, a way to philosophize and to live without inherently and necessarily becoming tangled in the obsession with reason.